In 2004, Boeing made a $32 billion bet that would change aviation history forever. They promised a plane so advanced, so efficient, that it would make every other aircraft obsolete overnight. It was the Dreamliner. But while the world was distracted by Boeing's plastic revolution, Airbus was quietly preparing a countermove, a zombie plane that refused to die. One is a high-tech masterpiece built from carbon fiber. The other is a refined beast of burden that costs $100 million less to buy. One changed the way we breathe at 40,000 feet, while the other is currently stealing Boeing's customers in the middle of a global crisis. Today, we aren't just comparing two planes, we're uncovering a chess match where a single mistake cost billions, and the better plane might not be the one you think. Welcome back to the channel. If you've flown long haul in the last decade, there's a 90% chance you've been on one of these two titans, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner or the Airbus A330. On paper, they look like direct rivals. They both carry roughly 250 to 300 passengers. They both fly across oceans. But under the skin, they represent two completely different philosophies of how a machine should conquer the sky. Boeing went for the clean sheet approach, rethinking every nut, bolt, and wire. Airbus went for evolution, taking a 30-year-old legend and giving it a heart transplant. But which strategy actually won? To answer that, we have to go back to the moment the dream almost became a nightmare.
In the early 2000s, the aviation industry was at a crossroads. Fuel prices were climbing, and airlines were desperate for a way to fly further for less. Boeing's answer was the 787, later renamed the 787 Dreamliner. This wasn't just a new plane, it was a fundamental shift in physics. Traditional planes are made of aluminum, heavy, prone to corrosion, and restricted in shape. The 787 was the first commercial airliner to have a fuselage and wings made of 50% composite materials, essentially high-tech plastic reinforced with carbon fiber. Why does this matter for the 30K views we're chasing? Because this material allowed Boeing to do things that were previously impossible. The wings. Look at a 787 in flight. Those wings don't just sit there, they flex upward like a bird. This raked wingtip design reduces drag so effectively that it saved 20% on fuel compared to the older Boeing 767. The cabin pressure. Because the composite hull is stronger and doesn't rust, Boeing could pump more humidity into the cabin and keep the air pressure at 6,000 feet instead of the standard 8,000. If you've ever wondered why you feel less crusty and jet-lagged on a 787, that's the reason. You're literally breathing better air. But building the future of flight came with a terrifying price tag. Boeing's supply chain was a mess. Parts were being made in Japan, Italy, and the US, and for a while, they didn't fit together. The 787 was 3 years late. It suffered battery fires that grounded the entire global fleet in 2013. Boeing was bleeding cash, and that is exactly when Airbus saw their opening. While Boeing was fighting fires, literally, Airbus was sitting on a gold mine. The original Airbus A330 had been flying since 1994. It was the safe choice. It was reliable, pilots loved it, and it was paid for. When the 787 started stealing orders, Airbus initially tried to build a light version of their new A350 to compete, but the airlines said no. They told Airbus, "We don't want a complicated new jet. We want the A330 we already know, but with the 787's engines." In 2014, the Airbus A330neo was born. Airbus's strategy was the ultimate life hack. They took the proven A330 airframe, slapped on massive new Rolls-Royce Trent 7000 engines, which are cousins to the 787's engines, and added A350-style sharklet wingtips. The result? They created a plane that was 14% more efficient than the old A330, but cost a fraction of the price of a Dreamliner. While a Boeing 787-9 might cost an airline around $293 million on the sticker, an A330-900neo can be snagged for significantly less, sometimes as low as $110 to $120 million depending on the deal. The mystery cotton. Why would an airline choose an old design over the high-tech Dreamliner? The answer lies in the acquisition versus operation paradox. If you're a budget-conscious airline like Cebu Pacific or AirAsia, do you want the Ferrari, the 787, that costs a fortune to buy but saves a bit on gas, or do you want the Toyota Camry, the A330neo, that is cheap to buy, easy to maintain, and does 90% of the same job?
If we want this video to hit 30,000 views, we have to look at the one thing most people miss: the payload range curve. On the surface, the Boeing 787-9 and the Airbus A330-900neo look like twins. They both have a maximum takeoff weight of around 250 tons, but how they use that weight is where the mystery lies. The Boeing 787-9 is the marathon runner. Because of its carbon fiber body, it is significantly lighter than the metal A330neo. This means it can carry a massive amount of fuel and fly up to 7,565 nautical miles. That's the distance from New York to Singapore without stopping. The Airbus A330neo, even with its 251-ton upgrade, taps out at about 7,200 nautical miles. But here is the mystery cotton. For 95% of the world's flights, that extra range doesn't matter. Most long-haul flights are under 4,000 miles. On those shorter, long-haul routes like London to New York, the A330neo is often more efficient. Why? Because the 787 is over-engineered for those routes. It's like using a specialized mountain climbing kit to walk up a flight of stairs. The A330neo is the perfect Goldilocks plane. Just enough technology to be efficient without the massive price tag of the all-carbon revolution. Now, let's talk about you, the person sitting in 32K. This is where the rivalry gets personal. Boeing's biggest marketing win for the 787 was the windows. They're 65% larger than a standard airplane window, and instead of plastic shades, they use electrochromic dimming. It looks like magic, but if you've ever been on a 787 during a daytime flight and the flight attendants locked the windows to dark blue, you know the frustration. You can't see the mountains below, and it never gets truly pitch black. Airbus kept the traditional shades. It's simple, it works, and you have control. But the A330neo has a secret weapon that Boeing hates: the 2-4-2 layout. In economy class, Boeing 787s are almost always configured in a 3-3-3 layout. That means 17-inch wide seats and a high chance of being stuck in the double middle nightmare. Airbus, on the other hand, was designed with a narrower fuselage that forces a 2-4-2 layout. This means only one middle seat per row, and the seats are usually 18 inches wide. The verdict? If you value your personal space and hate climbing over two strangers to go to the bathroom, the A330neo wins every time. But if you want to land feeling refreshed, the 787's higher humidity and lower cabin pressure, 6,000 feet versus 8,000 feet, are scientifically proven to reduce jet lag. It's a battle of body space versus body chemistry. We asked pilots what they think, and the answer reveals the deepest philosophical divide in aviation. In the Boeing 787, the pilot is the master. The plane uses a traditional yoke or steering wheel that physically moves. If the co-pilot moves his yoke, the pilot's yoke moves too. They can feel exactly what the other person is doing. It's a mechanical conversation. In the Airbus A330neo, the pilot is the manager. You have a side stick, essentially a high-tech gaming joystick. These sticks are asynchronous, meaning they don't move together. If both pilots move their sticks at the same time, the computer sums the inputs. Airbus pilots love the auto trim. You can set the plane's attitude, take your hand off the stick, and it stays exactly where you put it, even in turbulence. Boeing pilots call this flying a computer. They prefer the feel of the 787, which still requires them to trim the plane manually, keeping them more connected to the machine. One pilot put it best: "I miss flying the Boeing, but I prefer operating the Airbus."
We've talked about wings and windows, but the real reason this rivalry is still alive in 2026 comes down to one word: availability. If you are an airline CEO today and you want to order 20 new Boeing 787s, you have a problem. Boeing's order book is packed until the end of the decade. Between the high-profile FAA audits and the production stabilization efforts at the Charleston plant, getting your hands on a Dreamliner is like trying to get a front-row seat at a sold-out concert. Airbus played a different game. Because the A330neo uses a proven, existing airframe, they can build them faster. For airlines like Delta and Saudia, the A330neo isn't just a plane, it's a timeline solution. But there is a second, even bigger secret: commonality. If an airline already flies the classic A330, their pilots can transition to the A330neo in just 3 days of training. No expensive flight simulators, no months of ground school. This saves an airline millions in indirect costs that never show up on a spec sheet. As we sit here in 2026, the landscape has shifted again. Boeing has spent the last year undergoing a massive cultural safety reboot. They've bought back key suppliers like Spirit Aerosystems to regain control over the 787's quality, and it's working. The beefed-up 787s rolling off the line now have increased maximum takeoff weights, allowing them to carry an extra 5 to 6 tons of cargo. Meanwhile, Airbus is facing its own success crisis. They have so many orders for the A321neo and A350 that their supply chain is vibrating under the pressure. The A330neo, once the underdog, has now hit over 470 orders, proving it was never a zombie plane, it was a masterpiece of market timing. So, we return to our original question: which plane is actually better? If the better plane is the one that pushes the boundaries of human engineering, the one that lets you fly from London to Perth in a plastic tube with humid air and magic windows, then the Boeing 787 Dreamliner is the undisputed king. It changed the physics of what is possible. But if the better plane is the one that keeps your ticket prices low, the one that gives you an extra inch of shoulder room in economy, and the one that allows airlines to survive a global financial crisis by being cheap to buy and easy to fly, then the A330neo is the pragmatic champion. The final mystery? The better plane isn't the one with the most carbon fiber, it's the one that best fits the route you are flying today. Boeing built the future, but Airbus built the reality.